Hi, I'm Steve with GIllett Diesel in the turbocharger department. Today we're going to show you how to tear down an H1C turbocharger, and in future videos we will show you how to reassemble it. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to show you the tools that you're going to need for this disassembly. First of all, you are going to need a 13 millimeter wrench. You're going to need a 13 millimeter socket, 8 millimeter wrenches, an 8 millimeter socket, number 20 Torx, a ratchet. This one here is the 1/4 inch, and obviously here I have a 3/8 ratchet, and then a O-ring pick. And about a 4-pound sledgehammer. So the first thing that we're going to do when we disassemble this turbocharger here is we want to make sure we mark where the turbocharger is oriented so that we can put it back together in the exact location or pretty close, so we're not fighting it once we put it back on the truck. So the first thing that we do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a punch or a mark, a scribe, something like that you can indent in the housing to make it, you can see it once you clean it back up. So I'm going to do this one right here on the oil inlet hole. I'm going to just put a little bit of a little mark here on the exhaust housing, and I'm going to put another one on the compressor housing here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is what I did previously before we started shooting this video was I soaked the exhaust housing in some PB Blast. This stuff we found works really well to break up the rust and the buildup that comes from something, you know, like this that's 20 years old, 20 plus years old, to break down that buildup. And I usually like to do that about 30 or so minutes before, at least 30 minutes, to try to break down some of that stuff. So the next thing that we're going to do after we have let that soak for a while, we've marked our lines so that we can reassemble the housings the way that they are now. The first thing that I like to do is I take a punch and I put it on the bolt, and I take the punch and go around and hit every single bolt. We find that this breaks the rust loose and helps to ease getting these bolts out. Once we've hit all of the bolts, we take our 13 millimeter wrench and we work these bolts out. Now, the bolts that are underneath the oil drain and the oil inlet are not going to come all the way out. We're going to have to work the housing off a little bit to get those all the way out. So once we have the 2 bolts on the side and the bolts underneath the oil drain and the oil inlet, as far out as they'll go, we're going to work on getting the exhaust housing off. That one's good, and this one is as far as it will go. Alright, so at this point you take your sledgehammer, and we like to use a rubber mat like this to hammer it so that it doesn't take a beating on our bench. But what you're going to do is you're going to work all the way around the housing to make sure that the housing comes off evenly so that we don't damage our exhaust wheel. You can see the housing starts to come off, and you can work the bolts even more off until they come out. And make sure that you have some sort of container to hold all of your parts so you don't lose any of them. Once the housing is loose, you should be able to turn the housing to get the final 2 bolts out. And then the cartridge and compressor housing should come out just like that. Okay? At this point, we're going to just kind of inspect the housing and make sure that there's no drag marks. And in this case, this exhaust wheel has not made contact with the exhaust housing. So we also want to inspect our compressor wheel, or our exhaust wheel, to make sure that it doesn't have any drag marks on it either. The next step is that we're going to take the compressor housing off. I like to use, the simplest way is to use an 11mm on a gun and just take the V-band clamp off. And at this point, we're going to do the same thing as we did on the exhaust housing, and we're just going to tap lightly around to break this loose. And this doesn't take much. And make sure you pull it out straight out so that we don't damage any of our compressor fins. Now we're also going to inspect our housing here, and as you can see in this particular case we have some drag marks right here. If this is the case, it may need, depending on how bad these drag marks are, it probably needs a center section. But we will inspect this a little bit further to find out if we can actually fix this one, or what the case may be. At this point, we have our center section out. Now, the easiest way to get the compressor wheel off is to, we're going to walk over here to the vise, and we're going to put just the tail end of the wheel, the exhaust wheel, in the vise. You can also use a 19mm 12-point socket or a 3/4 inch 12-point socket to get this off also. We stick this tail end into the vise here. Make sure it's secure. And we're going to grab our 13mm socket and ratchet, and this shaft nut is on a reverse thread, so we are going to be turning this to the right. It comes off just that easy. Take the rest off with your fingers. Put it in our secure location, and then this wheel just slides off, just like that. Sometimes we see in some of these older H1Cs that the wheel is really stuck, and you really have to work off that. But it should just slide straight off. We take our cartridge out of the vise, and you can lightly just tap the tail end of this here, and the shaft should just slide out, or you should be able to push it. If it has a lot of carbon buildup, it may need a little bit of a tap to get it out. Okay, so on the exhaust wheel here, we want to look for any damage that we can see on the journals here, and this one looks pretty good. If you have any scarring, anything like that, please contact us and we can sell you just the exhaust wheel itself. The turbine wheel and shaft is what it's called. Okay, at this point, we're just going to break down the rest of the cartridge. These bolts here are an 8mm. Again, I like to use the impact, and I have a 8mm socket and the extension onto this 3/8 impact. At this point, this bearing housing should just come straight off and turn it over and the bolts will fall out. At this point, we have the seal plate, and this piece just comes right out. This is called an oil deflector, and you just put that in your safe place. And then you have your oil flinger is what it's called. It just pushes out from the compressor side, and it's got a piston ring on it. We take our O-ring pick and pick out the O-ring that's in here, and the new rebuild kit comes with that O-ring. And that's all for that seal plate. Okay, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to take out the thrust bearing, the thrust collar, and the journal bearings. So these are the number 20 Torx. Okay, I always like to take it and just give these a little bit of a tap. These have some pretty good Loctite on them. We find that it takes, it kind of breaks the Loctite a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to get off. If you want to speed this process up a little bit, you can put your impact on it and just slowly pull these out. All right, and that's your thrust bearing there. This one looks really good actually. This is a good core that we have. And then what comes out, which this was right here, it just fell down, but right here was the what they called the thrust collar, and we just pull that out and put that in our bin here. Now what we have is, all we have left in this is the journal bearings, and this is where we use the O-ring pick. What we do is there's a snap ring right here, and it's got some little holes in it. And now we know that when we do a rebuild, when we have the rebuild kit, that the snap rings new snap rings are going to come with the rebuild kit. So we go ahead and just bend these snap rings and then pop them out. It's just the easiest way to get them out because we don't need to save them anyway. And then the journal bearings just slide out. Might need to work them here a little bit. Sometimes if you've had some problems with your, if you've got some real drag marks on your wheels, these bearings might be stuck in there pretty good. So we can also look at these and we can kind of get an idea of what our oil looks like. If this brass has any wear right here, then we know that we've got some dirty oil coming through our turbo, scarring up our journal bearings. Take out the inside snap ring, I just push that through, and then I flip it over on the exhaust side here and do the same. Bend the snap rings and pull the journal bearing out. And then I will push the other one out. And we want to make sure that they come out completely and they're not hiding in there anywhere. As you can see, I've got both of mine here. Okay, so at this point what we want to just check is we want to check our piston ring areas to make sure that there's not any unnecessary wearing on it. So on the bearing housing here, you want to check this surface right here, and you're going to want to clean this area up in a solvent tank, or if you have a sandblaster, you can sandblast this, but you're looking for any wear that goes on in this surface here. All the way around you want to double check to make sure that it looks nice and clean and machined. The other seal area that you want to check is this one here in our back plate, our seal plate. We want to check all the way around and make sure that there's not any unnecessary wear that will cause us some problems when we go to rebuild it. If those two surfaces are nice and clean, then you can proceed with continue to rebuild your turbo. If you have any questions, please give us a call at 801-571-7780 and ask for our turbo shop. We can get you any of these parts that you might find that have some unnecessary wear, or if you just have any questions about the rebuild process, about the teardown process, please give us a call. Thanks.